All right, all right. We can go ahead and get started. Okay, welcome everybody to, I forget which number, fourth office hours for Semantic Kernel. These are the public community office hours that anyone from the open source community welcome to join. So we're certainly glad to have you here. Just looking at the chat, I think we have a very wide range of people. People from Charlotte, Munich, Kiev, Austin, Espoo, Finland, Austin, Texas, Seattle, Washington, Denver, Colorado, Montreal, Canada, Dallas, Texas, South Africa, Johannesburg, 2 people, Berlin, and Guerneville, and England. So very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming in. I know the time zone might be a little challenging for a few of you, so really appreciate that you're taking the next hour to join us here. So I'm Alex, and I'm here joined with Craig, and I see Teresa on the call, maybe some other people from the Semantic Kernel team. Just wave your hand if you're from the Semantic Kernel team. That'll be good. And yeah, we can go ahead and get started. So to just before we jump into any questions, to kind of give you the overall format, we certainly invite you all to ask questions live. I have several pre-collected questions, so we can definitely go over those. But if you have anything that you want to talk about, that you want to follow up on, any conversations, please just put it in the chat, and we can try to get to them. And if you want to engage on any of these topics, also just raise your hand, come off mute, and we could discuss further. So without further ado, just kind of give a quick kind of community, what do you call it, engagement community event that we did. Is we were at AlHacks, which was UC Berkeley's AI hackathon this past weekend. So included a few little behind the scenes, like we don't exactly have swag yet to hand out, but we made up our own, or we just printed some stuff out and sent it. So if you're interested in this type of stuff, just let us know. We can maybe create some things. But anyway, so this hackathon at Berkeley, super exciting. I think there were 1,500 or so students and hackers from all over the world who attended, and we got to learn a lot about the sort of exciting AI applications and ideas that a lot of people are building on. Several of them may have used Semantic Kernel. It's very hard to tell. We don't really have exact telemetry on how to do this. But anyway, expect future engagements, future events from the Semantic Kernel team at these events. And if you have any events that you'd like us to potentially participate in, either in person or digitally, let us know. Reach out to us on Discord, or and we can try to make something happen. Okay, so jumping into the questions. So we have Ronan to kick us off. So Ronan asks, is there any advice on the implementation of a conversation element to Semantic Kernel in terms of, say, for example, a certain skill that does not have enough information to complete a skill, then it would prompt the user for the missing details, similar to how a base LLM such as GPT would. Appreciate the great work you all do. Well, thank you for that, Ronan. Craig or Teresa, do you want to kind of give some thoughts here?
Yeah, it's a good question. This is one that we have had asked before, and I myself have hit the same problem, and some customers that we've worked with have hit a similar problem. There's probably 5 different ways that you could try and approach this. One way, and I don't know that it's the best way, but it's a way that I have tried, is to have a planner, action planner, or the sequential planner be responsible for resolving a bunch of these things. And so let's say you're looking for the user to complete basically a form. So usually in the form, they type in their name, they type their email address, they type their phone number, whatever it is. Let's just pretend that's the scenario. So if you have skills that can look up who the logged in user is you may not need to have the user type those things in. So let's say I'm logged in with my Microsoft account, and because I'm logged in with my Microsoft account, we can look up Graph. Graph can give back my email address. Therefore, me, the user, I do not have to type in my email address. But there might be things like my physical address, my postal address, that are not available through Graph. So you do need to ask the user for those. And in the same way that you can use the planner to resolve a value using Graph, you could also use the planner. You could have a skill in there that's something like unresolved value, or whatever it should be called, and it has the appropriate declaration, so the human description that the model will refer to when it selects that skill, and the description will be something like, when you can't find a value, this is where you go, and have that be responsible for an event or some interaction back to the user that says, hey, I don't know what this field is, can you please complete it? Then once that's completed, once the user has entered their address, let's say there's another field that's missing, on the subsequent hop back to the model, you would have, okay, this is what the user's entered already, this is what the model's already resolved, pass it across and have the same process repeat. So that's one approach that I have tried. I don't know, Teresa, I also saw Adrian and some others from the team on the call. Feel free to jump in with other thoughts. If there's no other thoughts, we can go on to the next one. Or I don't know if Ronan's on the call, if that helped.
Or anyone from the community, if you have any thoughts on this matter. I would say it is a common ask or recurring thing. So if anything, we might want to just create a sample for at least show one way of doing this type of stuff.
That's a good idea.
I do see a question on the chat since we're on this topic. Can you elaborate what planner is? So planner is this concept in the semantic kernel where instead of you explicitly saying, hey, I want to execute skills or plugins X, Y, Z, you have the AI actually do that. AI handle the orchestration. It will create a plan that is human readable that will only be based off the skills that you provided to the kernel. And from there, right, you can see what the plan looks like. It could be a JSON format, XML, whichever representation. And then from there, it should have at least the functions that it will call, along with the parameters, the values that it needs to use to call them. So yes, look at that that link that Craig posted. Yes. And yeah, Diogenes says you could raise errors in a semantic way, like, hey, you missed a field instead of an error. So I think that's a great idea. All right, next question. So we have Stephanie asks, how can we have predefined sequential plans? For example, for a specific user intent, let's say I want to create a new event for my company. We could have a predefined plan without letting the AI model propose its own plan. For example, ask for an objective, ask for a list of participants, find some possible slots depending on participants' calendars, propose an agenda, create the event. Predefined sequential plan. To me, this sounds like you have a form, as Craig was talking about, you have a form that you want to fill out with fields that you know ahead of time that you need to get filled out. And a planner in this case would be tasked with collecting the necessary data to fill that out. I don't know if anyone else has other interpretations or thoughts on this.
Lee has some links in the comment there. So his suggestion was that you can, part of the planning infrastructure, you can serialize a plan. And so like save the state of a plan. Let's say you generate a plan once. And let's say the scenario is different, Alex. Let's pretend the scenario is new employee onboarding. And the plan is that every new employee gets a coffee mug. And to get the coffee mug, a request has to be made to whoever it is that sends the mugs to them. So it can be, let's pretend that's the scenario. And it's the same thing every single time. Like, given the user's identity in the system, send a message to the coffee mug supplier and send it to them. So it's exactly the same thing every single time. And Lee's suggestion was I guess you would maybe do the plan once with the AI, serialize the state of that plan, so that when that subsequent request comes in to send the coffee mug to Alex's, Alex is a new employee, it just runs that exact same plan rather than having to go through the planning process, finding the skill that connects to the coffee mug vendor. You don't need to waste time and money on that. You already know that it's the same one every single time.
Yeah, I like that. I think if you, because each of these plans is a call to an API, right? Or it can cost some tokens, maybe a lot of tokens. It does make sense to do the planning process all kind of upfront and then kind of save that, serialize that, and reuse that in some way. And yeah, I mean, so okay, for Lee said, a plan is a tree. Sequential planner creates a plan, a single sequence of steps. To create a predefined plan object, see this example 31, custom planner. And we also have this stepwise planner that can also create a predefined plan with a single step. So yeah, so I would investigate that. Stephanie, I don't know if you're on the call, if you wanted to add any more thoughts or color to this, but yeah, try those ideas out. Okay, next up we have Richard. Richard asks, a pattern that is emerging from our use cases supporting multiple memory stores, i.e. with different providers. For example, maybe from Azure Search plus additional bespoke sources. Is there any thinking we can lean on in SK for how to approach this, as it looks like it is only possible to add a single memory store plus semantic memory to a kernel instance?
Let's say that's true. And others on the call, correct me if it is not true, but let's say it's true. What you could do, all of the memory store implementations are in .NET land implementations of an interface, and in Python, they conform to some like consistent pattern as well. So if you wanted to have multiple memory stores with different providers, you could do an implementation. Let's say you do like my implementation memory store has multiple providers backing it, so that when a request comes in for finding the nearest, I can't remember what the thing's called, finding the nearest matches, whatever it is, searching for results, you could then decide which of the underlying providers in your implementation of memory store to go to. So that's a way that you could get around that. I don't know if that will probably give you enough control, because you'd have the collection that's called out to do the searching, and when you're adding things, you're adding them to a collection. So I think at a high level, you could add things to both collections, like both underlying memory stores if you wanted. Let's say it was cog search and it was quadrant. Let's say you just wanted to put them in both for whatever reason, and then maybe you only want to query one of them based on some condition. You could do that inside of the implementation.
Yeah, I'd be curious, Richard, if you're on the call, what these use cases where you have multiple memory stores, like what that looks like, because yeah, I mean, naively, I would be like, oh, why not just use one memory store? You just stuff everything in, and maybe you access a different collection, as needed, right? For each use case. Maybe there might be some advantages, like some implementations have some nice things that others don't. Uh, but I'd love to understand the scenario where this comes up.
I think we're sort of exploring different scenarios where we want to tap into sort of a diverse set of data sources to with the same sort of memory pattern. I'm not sure whether we're heading down the right path of this, to be honest, or not, but we're trying to leverage the memory pattern for a diverse set of sources, some of which are vector memory sources and some of which are just semantic memory sources. Yeah, and I wonder whether, in some of the samples we've got external information sources that appear to be handled in a slightly different way. Maybe we're trying to shoehorn too much into the memory implementation and semantic kernel and what it's intended to cover. But yeah, I mean, the suggestion of basically wrapping a bunch of memory providers is certainly sounds like a good suggestion. I just really wanted to make sure there wasn't something we were missing fundamentally in how we organize these different and diverse potential sources for what you might think of as memories.
Does anyone else on the call have a similar sort of memory use case or challenge that may not be fully met with a vector memory store? That's okay. Okay, cool.
Okay.
Yeah. Richard, let's think about this some more. We will huddle up. Semantic Kernel team will huddle up to think about how we could potentially support these different type of scenarios.
Yeah, I just have one quick thing. So depending on the source of the data, you could do a connector plugin, whatever you want to call it, a skill, right, to get the data from there. Doesn't necessarily have to come through the underlying memory store. If you feed it through the underlying memory store, you're then kind of constrained because all of the queries into that memory store, like the happy path is typically the text memory skill, which is something we ship as one of the core skills in the kernel. You're then kind of constrained by that. And if your data stores are not vector databases, it might be like an inefficient way of doing it. In the Copilot chat sample, we have a combination of the repository pattern, and this is in .NET, so sorry for people who are not .NET people, but we use the repository pattern to pull chat messages, chat history, bunch of other things. Tao and others on the call can correct me. So that's like a typical data access abstraction, just to go straight to Cosmos DB to do those requests. And then there's also some embedding requests through the text memory skill. I believe that's still the case today, where it does the cosine similarity and it does the fast lookup. And that's where you get the real benefit in implementations of iMemory store. So I would think about, do you need to really push it through this kind of opinionated text memory skill path, or can you use your typical data access approaches for some of the data that does not need to be embedded?
It did seem like it fitted the fundamental bill, which was a measuring relevancy of
Okay.
the intent to what we're getting, but also just having a kind of strategy to fit the results into the context window. Just having a strategy to do that. But I think, maybe it's picking off those two aspects, and that's why we gravitated towards it. But actually, it's probably may not be a great fit for all those sources, and we may need to sort of replicate some of those features in another way. Yeah, that's really useful anyway. Thanks.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, so I saw on the chat, Teresa, if you want to come off mute, do you want to give your follow-up to Stephanie's question?
Hey, yeah. I just want to call out that one thing we noticed when implementing the plan, reusing a plan, is you want to be able to reload the context that the plan needs whenever you're basically when you want to rerun the same plan. If you don't execute the plan right after execution, it kind of loses the context or the skills or the memories that it needs to run the plan in that hop in between. So I just wanted to call that out to make sure you're reloading that context in.
And when you say context, you mean the context, like object?
Of the kernel.
Of the kernel.
Yeah, of the kernel.
Okay.
Yeah, I linked an example in the chat message of how we did it in Copilot chat. And then I think there is also an example in the kernel HTTP server, the one that the sample apps use, if you guys want to look there too.
Got it. Yes, I see this. Very cool. That is under external information skill.cs. Very good. Thank you. All right. Jumping on ahead, we have Amar. He asks, why chain methods when I can call one at a time? For example, make 2 calls. I have some logic where I would only run the chain if a case is met. For example, if response is related to a database table, then check for authentication, then run the second function in the chain. What is the best way to handle that? In a way, I want to implement a strategy pattern where my first input is from a general chatbot that will redirect you to the correct department in call center for a bank where you press 1 or 2 and so on.
And
Okay,
I am
so-
on in case someone wants to ask more questions.
Yeah, so
yeah.
so you're saying condition, you want to have a condition when some user input comes in, and based on what they're asking you, you want to have multiple different branches that it then follows. Okay.
Yeah, so it's based on, like for example, with a lot of places when I call, you have to verify who the person is, or let's say you want to make sure that that person is logged in. That's the kind of governance that I want to have around my application. That way, not everyone, that way if I have access to my, like bank account transactions, for example, I have to make sure that that's the right person, or at the very least get something like last digits of their credit card number, something like that, just to confirm who they are. So I'm trying to come up with a pattern. So the only thing I can do right now is just make one call, then get a response, and then have like an if statement, just regular C#, and then see if that response has any secure data. And if that's the case, then ask them for more information. But I was trying to see if there's anything in the library that's built in, or if there's any pattern. Honestly, I'm new to this, so if you just throw any terms for me to search, I'll search. I know planner was mentioned earlier, and I think that can lead me toward the right direction, but I'm not sure if it handles like branching. So I would only run some functions when I have to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And Lee has suggested the intent detection pattern through Action Planner. So you're right, it does come back to Planner. That might be the good place to start looking into this. You can do basic intent detection without Planner. And then you could do, as you just said, some conditional code back in application land to handle that. Planner will help you write a little bit less code in that sense. You probably still have some JSON coming back or something that you as the app developer then evaluate and make the next decision based on. If you, we have another planner coming out, an iterative planner. I don't think it's been put into the repository just yet. And that one does multiple evaluations in each step, whereas the other ones kind of build a plan and they just burn through the plan, or Action Planner just picks the appropriate function to invoke. So there might be something in there. I don't know if others on the call have suggestions. I think starting with plan is a good place to start looking at.
I think for the first question, and again, I was very beginner when I read it. I still am. Who isn't? I'm assuming I will be taking the cost and performance because I'll be performing multiple questions. And is that okay? So that's probably why. Okay, so I would probably rather chain than not to chain and have one at a time.
Yeah, you're still going to have, it's based on tokens. So the number of tokens you send to the model is typically where the spend is. And this is assuming that you're using an OpenAI or an Azure OpenAI model or some other hosted model where you pay per token. If you're using something locally, let's say you get something on Hugging Face that's, works for your scenario, and you're hosting that on your, your infrastructure, then you're only paying for the infrastructure at that point, and the cost is maybe different. There's also different capabilities though. So most people typically start out with something like GPT-3.5 Turbo, which is the cheapest of the models. It's also the most like general purpose capable model. And then once you've played with that for a little bit, you could also then think about, okay, do I need this model? Do I need a more capable model? Do I need to go GPT-4? And for some of the things around planning, you will see that with 3.5, it's okay, but with 4 is really where most of the planning is like sufficient and appropriate. So some of playing with the models will also need to come into it. Again, GPT-4 is slower, more expensive, and those things come into play.
Yeah, I will also add that this paradigm that we're all learning, right? We're all experiencing. It's a new thing. The old way of creating these sort of chatbot or contact center sort of experiences was very manual, right? You would have to code up your own dialogue trees, like if this, then this, all this sort of stuff, bunch of switch statements, something like that. You could still do that, sure, if you want to, but I think, as Craig mentioned, right, the more you rely on, this is one of the principles of semantic kernel, right? Like, let the AI do more of the work for you, and like, why write code when your code will probably get stale, but the AI will continue to get better. So, but I think there are some like bits and pieces there. It goes back to the previous questions around like how do we capture input or like sort of things that dynamically change, and especially if you have to like replan or this is probably the teaser for that iterative planner that might be coming out soon. Is that there will be scenarios where you can't just plan all in one go. You have to adjust dynamically as user input comes in. So
Thank you
we
so
have a
much.
hand up. Yeah, for sure. We have a hand up from Chris.
Sorry, mute leg. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, cool. Just wanted to drill into one detail regarding Mara's question. So when you are chaining semantic skills, can we clarify, is it actually making a round trip for each request? I think his assumption is there's an efficiency in the number of round trips. Can we confirm or deny whether that's the case?
Yeah, so if you have, it's slightly complicated. Let's say you have one semantic skill which refers to a second semantic skill through the templating language. So one of them invokes the second function. In that case, it's crunching them together and assuming you're within the token limit, 4,000 tokens, 8,000, whatever it is based on the model, then that will all get sent to the model. So they get squished together. So if we're talking about a chain in the sense that we have multiple independent, discrete separation of concerns kind of thing going on with our semantic functions, then yeah, Chris is right. It's just the one hop to the model in that case with all the tokens, the combination of all the things in the tokens. If you have something different going on where you have a loop, that's obviously multiple calls will go to the LLM.
Well, we support the pattern where you can pass in kind of a params array of skills into the invoke async, which I assumed that's what he was referring to as the chaining. And then the output of one skill is passed in as the input of another. Would those be separate hops?
Yeah, run async. I see Devis is here. Devis, do you remember, is run async multiple hops? And are we still advising that sort of approach where you pass in a bunch of different things to run async?
To kernel run async?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I would suggest not to use it. It's just a convenient way to run a plan, hard-coded in line. Like if you have a list of functions that you want to run, you know exactly which functions you can do kernel run and pass that list. It's a very old method. We used a lot initially. We're not using it much, and I suggested to get rid of it. It's kind of a bad practice unless you're in a specific place. But even in that case, rather than doing kernel.run list of functions, I would suggest to create a plan object, put the functions that you want to execute in that plan, and execute the plan. It's a better design.
Awesome. Good discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. We have Donovan. He says, I am struggling with determining user intent and obtaining enough context to successfully execute specific skills with semantic kernel. For example, if users attempt to do something which would require usage of a certain skill, how do I ensure beforehand that there is enough context to do that? Currently, I'm passing in requests into a planner and working from that. Though problems occur when attempting to make sure that there's enough context regarding that request. For example, a user saying send a message. I would additionally need to know to who and what the content is. Though at this point, the content is already passed into the planner, and when testing, I am currently not able to make the planner ask for further context. Should a planner be used in this context? I may be struggling to understand which process in something like trying to send a message should be completed by the planner.
It feels very similar to the earlier question by, I can't remember who it was on the first slide. Like, I have not the complete context, therefore I need to get more information from the user. So I think the suggestion there was, you know, you either have a skill or some way that you break out of the plan, call back to the user, then you pass the context back in for a subsequent execution. Teresa had linked some of the samples around this. So I think it feels very similar to that one. I don't know, Alex, if you disagree. Do you think it's different?
The only thing I would maybe add here is if you think that the ask is ill-formed, right, the goal or whatever the user is saying is ill-formed, and you can catch that, maybe it's a semantic skill that catches that, then yeah, you can like early terminate, if you will, or like just like get more information, so that you can actually like rerun the plan. This is similar, at least in my mind, like analogous to when you search something on Bing, let's say, right? Actually, behind the scenes, you could do this when you see the Bing chat. Like oftentimes, it will do this sort of like query rewrite based off of what it thinks that you want it to actually search for. And what that really does for, at least from the Bing side, is improve the chances that it will, you know, return you something that you want. So I think something like that could be at play here, where, yeah, like sometimes a user will type into a chat bot or chat setting something that is ill-formed or not enough context, not enough information. So yeah, so if you can somehow capture that or like recognize that it's not complete, and then return or, you know, get the info either like directly by asking, or do that yourself, like by rewriting. That could be a plan or strategy. Just taking a look at chat really quickly. Some good stuff going on there. Okay, next question. We have Adelma. She points out Copilot chat sample app, too many request error. I have a set of skills that have been running locally using the planner and SKA with the 3.5 turbo model. I wanted to integrate my skills to the Copilot chat sample user interface to work with and be able to have chat context. The integration works perfectly, but I find that getting a response from the model takes anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes due to a too many request error, which is usually related to a max number of requests and tokens that can be submitted. I assume the Copilot chat sample would consume more tokens than my implementation that was running locally, but did not expect this type of error. Are there any suggestions on what I could do or remove from the sample to avoid this error and delay in responses?
Hal or Teresa, do you have any thoughts on this one?
I'm not sure. Too many requests as in too many requests to the model, or just too many HTTP requests? Because currently Copilot Chat, I think, make a couple requests to the model before it can generate the response, because it needs to generate a prompt for the model to get the response. I think I need more context on this.
Yes, I see Adelma's on the call. Adelma, if you want to hop off, I don't know if you could share screen, so maybe not, but send the image and I'll paste it on this PowerPoint. And if you want to describe what the situation is more, feel free to come off mute.
I wish I could describe in more detail. I just kind of included everything that I had at the moment in the question. I kind of don't know where the error is coming from. I kind of assumed it could potentially be related to me hitting a quota in one of the models, but I've been using the 3.5 model locally, and that's been fine. I assumed maybe it was a quota limit with the embedding model. I just don't have any confirmation on that, so I kind of wanted to see if there's any suggestions. I can share an image of what that error looks like though, since I do have it on me.
Yes, please.
Are you using OpenAI or are you using Azure OpenAI?
Azure OpenAI.
Yeah, maybe drop the image in the chat, and Adama, we can follow up with you also after this call.
Okay,
if
perfect.
needed as well. So
Okay.
thanks for calling that out, though.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Then moving on. The Dakar. He asks. Actually, I'm not sure. So Dakar asks guidelines on skill plugin descriptions. We have many teams working on creating the skills and onboarding those to the platform created using Semantic Kernel. Sometimes there's an overlap of skill description, and the right skill is not getting executed based on the user query. Are there any guidelines on creating proper skill description? So this is, for those who don't know, in order for the planner to pick up like the skill or to know which skill to invoke, it does rely on the actual description or the documentation really, of that skill, that function that you're writing, native function or semantic function. And that is, obviously if you provide a more rich description, as well as describing the parameters of the function, right, you get a much better result. So this question of like guidelines on creating proper skill description, I mean, I think if you're in a scenario where you have somewhat ambiguous sounding or like maybe overlapping skills, I would at least rethink, like, can I separate them? Can I make them as independent as possible? And maybe put more of the logic into one skill than having two similar ones. Other than that, like, I think the other way is actually inside Planner itself. If you create a custom planner, you can provide examples yourself. This is following the few shot learning paradigm where you hint to the model, like, this is how I want you to behave. These are potentially like the usage patterns that with these functions that I want you to use. That could be another way to help the planner disambiguate. But yeah, there's some initial thoughts. I don't know if Devis or Craig or anyone else has others.
I would use the model. I would ask the model that you're going to run this on. This is the this is the function, or this is, maybe you could pass a function signature to the model. You could just do this in Playground, like go to the OpenAI Playground or anywhere. This is a function signature. This is what I'm going to use Semantic Kernel Planner for this. And what would you suggest, model, that I label that I describe this as? And when you have a bunch of them, you could say, okay, here are several different functions. They exist in their own independent skills, which it sounds like is happening in this scenario. Model, what would you suggest? Ask the model, because you're going to eventually then have the model evaluate them later, assuming you should ask the same model when you're doing this in dev as you expect it to execute during production, so that it's giving you back a consistent result. But a lot of these things, we don't need to burden ourselves with the challenge sometimes of these things. We'll just ask the model, because we're going to ask the model again later to pick one of them based on what it thinks.
I like that. Again, let the model do more of the work. Don't stress about creating documentation if you don't have to. All right. Next question we have from Harper. Token management strategies for chatbot scenarios. How to divvy up the prompt token capacity between a transcript, meta prompts, examples, partner, data context, and the model response. Also strategies for managing the transcript length as it grows. I think this is a great question for the Copilot chat team because this is exactly what you all are encountering. So anyone from there would like to hop in to at least give some thoughts on token management strategies.
Or even just talk about what's been implemented in Copilot chat.
And if folks from Copilot chat don't want to chat, like talk, I know this is something that I've been seeing from internal first party customers as well. And while we don't have any explicit plans around this, things that have been requested are the ability to do token aware templating so that you can create a template and then understand or set limits on how many tokens different portions of that template take. There's also been requests around understanding token usage. So understanding how many tokens have been used so far, allowing you access to that so that you could then proactively take measures to throttle your token usage. Because generally what we found is that it's a lot better for you to throttle usage before you get throttled by the model or the service, because at that point you're going to hit some hard limit that you have no options to do otherwise than wait. Whereas if you do some throttling, you may be able to do it in a smarter way that less impacts your user experience. So there are 100%, this is a topic that we've heard from folks internally as well. And I would expect to see some progress here over the next couple months. I'll be posting some features in GitHub shortly, and then we can track progress there. But in the meantime, some folks from the Copilot chat might want to weigh in.
And at a high level, I can give what I believe was happening at some point in Copilot chat, which may be slightly different to what we're doing today. But basically, you have a chat. I'm going to have a conversation. I'll type in something, the bot responds, we go back and forwards. Sometimes I'll say things like, okay, or I'll say yes, or I'll say no, like very brief responses, which are not very high value in terms of their individual position in the sequence. What we had been doing, and I don't know if we're still doing this, but we were doing summarization of the last N messages in a chat to get the summary of what had been talked about, which is intended to be smaller than each of the last N messages in a sequence. So one strategy is to summarize what's happened in the conversation, ensure the summary is smaller than the sum of those chat messages that were sent. And then the most basic implementation is a sliding window. So let's say you have an ongoing conversation for, I don't know, 10 weeks, and you say, okay, I'm only going to keep a history of the last 4 weeks of conversation. So you have this sliding window that keeps moving as time goes on. So slice up different portions of the message. And awesome, Tal's put in some awesome stuff. Okay, so token limits, we have weight, we have cool stuff. Okay, this is different to back when I was looking at it. It's changing very rapidly, I would say as well. Copilot Chat has a pretty good sized team working on it, and there's been a lot of improvements that have come in.
Cool. Tal, do you want to add anything or comment on what we're seeing here?
Yeah, I can briefly speak to this. It's a really complicated topic, so I recommend people to dive deep and really read the code. But it's hard for me to describe it in language. So how the Copilot chat works is when you send a message to the bot, it will go ahead and do different things to kind of analyze your intent and then to extract the chat history that is saved in one of the data stores, and then it will try to grab cognitive memories from embedding from memory database, and possibly if it decides to invoke one of the planners, then it will try to grab information from the execution results of the planner. So it combines everything into the into the thing that we call the final prompt, right? But we kind of limit how each section of the final prompt, like we kind of have a token limit for each section of the final prompt. So as you can see here, for the memories, kind of it's like 30% of the token limit we set for the so the token limits for the prompt is completion token limit minus the response token limit. So that's called a context token limit. So the memories takes up 30% of the context token limit. And so if you have like 100 entries of relevant memories, we kind of just grab the top kind of maybe 30 that has the highest score, relevancy score, and then put that into the final prompt, and then we discard the rest. And kind of like the same thing for the document context, and the same thing for the external information context. I don't know if that makes sense. Hopefully this makes sense.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, thank you for the walkthrough. And again, this is one version, one implementation that our team has at least seemed to work well for us. But we certainly invite you all to to offer your own implementations, or even just share your strategies for how to handle this. Because yes, as Steve mentions, this is a challenging topic. Okay, we have the last 8 minutes, so I want to try to get through these questions. Jess asks, how exactly do the semantic functions, skills, plugins connect to the applications? Where are they typically called? I'm looking specifically at the Q&A sample app, but pretty general question. I think this is just about how do the functions connect to the applications.
Yeah,
This
this is maybe
okay.
the GitHub Q&A, I think, right, Alex? I'm not sure there's another sample app that's question and answer beyond that. So with the GitHub sample, we have a backend Azure function, and that backend Azure function loads a bunch of skills in. And so what was the question? What was the remainder of the question?
How are they called? Or where are they called?
Where are they typically called? Okay, so the model we've done for some of the samples is client-server architecture. You have front-end web app, and then you have a back-end Azure function in this particular sample or scenario. The back-end Azure function is a very basic HTTP server. It's stateless. Anytime a message comes into it, it's passing in the OpenAI key, the model name, a graph token, potentially a bunch of other things from the client, the endpoint, and that sort of thing. And then the skill that it's asking to invoke is just invoked. So we have the kernel kind of sitting backend because all of your keys typically are not there, even though in this sample we do pass them from the client. Never do that in your actual shipping application. It's just for demonstration, just to make it simple for a developer to come and learn. And so it's all hosted in a backend. You could have a model that does not do it in the backend. You could have a mobile app. Maybe you want to have the model on the phone. Maybe it's not an OpenAI model or a model that requires a key, so you feel comfortable running it on device and it's not going to like turn your phone into a space heater and drain the battery. Then you could run it on a phone. We do have support for custom models, so that means that you could implement a custom model if you have one, or you could use a model from Hugging Face. You could pull it down, you could put it on a phone or on a PC or a Mac or whatever. So yeah, typically most of them are behind an endpoint somewhere. You could have them not be behind an endpoint, but typically you want to protect a key or something like that. So that's kind of how it works. And then how do they connect to the applications? They are invoked by this orchestrator. Semantic Kernel is an orchestrator. So all of the semantic functions, skills, plugins, whatever, are invoked by the orchestrator, given a user's input. So what's the ask the user is making at that moment in time? And then it can either explicitly invoke a specific skill or function or plugin, or it can use a planning process to work out which ones to invoke.
Beautiful, beautiful answer. Great. Next question. How to integrate, or Parshuram asks how to integrate Power App Dataverse in Semantic Kernel Copilot Chat. If I understand this question, I believe it's like, how do I get access to all these great Power App connectors that are out there? I think we've talked about there's like, what, 1,500 or so connectors in Power Apps that you could bring in. We only maybe directly have implementation for a subset of them. So the short answer is implement the connector. There might be some examples on GitHub to do that, but it should be hopefully straightforward to do. If it's not, just let us know, and we can we create some more samples.
There was a question about this one on GitHub also. So this could be quite a complicated process also. Dataverse is the data store with Power Apps. So I think the question's asking, how do they pull content from Dataverse to have relevance maybe in Copilot Chat, which then becomes an embedding question, and it's, you go down the rabbit hole. So this one, I think there is a question. I don't know if it's the same person who asked a question here as on GitHub. There is a thread on GitHub discussing this. So I would suggest, ask the question on GitHub and follow it on GitHub, and we can help you through that discussion.
That's good. Okay, Rajesh asks about roadmap for downloading models from Hugging Face for the C# side. So the challenge here, I'll just answer. The challenge here is that Hugging Face has native Python support. Anything from the C# side would need to either wrap that or make use of, like, I think Hugging Face has a API you could also call, make HTTP requests against a hosted Hugging Face model. So maybe this is a question about, will Hugging Face ever have a native C# thing? I don't know. I don't know what their roadmap is, but from our side, yeah, I don't know. Devis or whoever else want to quickly comment on anything more to show C# developers Hugging Face.
I don't think we have a good answer here. Hugging Face is such a big service. Developing a C# client for Hugging Face would be a major effort for the team. And we know, though, that the Python SDK, and that is also one of the reasons why the Python SDK exists, is always going to be ahead in some sense when it comes to machine learning and exploring new features and flexibility in that kind of space, like using more models, local models, and all that. We're thinking about that, like, for example, using Onyx, but I don't think there is anything in the roadmap at this point. We would love to see some Onyx examples that would help to introduce the concept of custom models into the C# SDK. If anyone wants to step ahead and try to do that, then we can also support it. And then we could also see if on the Hugging Face side, they have any plan to do either C# or maybe there is a Java version. Since we're also working on the Java SDK, we are going to have multiple languages, and we can't develop every feature in every language. So the core of the kernel will be supported across all these languages. Support for Hugging Face is a little bit on the edge, and it's more of a community effort, I would say.
Sounds good. Okay, just to wrap up. So Steve asks, is the new Azure ML Studio built on SK? Will it include same features as SK? I think there's overlap, and as anything, we are working with this team, and we are looking to bring in the relevant features both ways. We want to incorporate things from Azure ML Studio and vice versa. So sorry, quick answer to that. Okay, this is a little longer. Oh, okay, this is about run async. So we kind of talked about this earlier, at least from the C# angle. Creating a customized back and forth through an API endpoint. I would say let's revisit this question next week, or during the chat. Actually, Paul, it is you. Hopefully, the discussion earlier is helpful. From the Python side, it's similar sort of experience and yeah, similar sort of ideas. So, but we can also just talk on Discord or something like that.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, very last question from Neon Sunset. Does SK accept rewrites, specifically implementations? Of course. Answer is yes. If you see something that needs improvement, or that you have like very strong feelings for, express them through a PR, and we will gladly look at them, review them, and hopefully merge it in. So, yes. All right. Well, we are at time. Thank you again for everyone for coming. And yeah, please come by next time. All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.